I just want to say Kaya Wanju, so hello and welcome. We acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are Australia's first astronomers, and as we look up at the wall, which is the sky, and observe the Mika, or the moon, and the Jinda stars, we may occasionally see a Binar, which is a shooting star. We acknowledge their long-standing systems of knowledge with a strong focus on observations of the sky and the land on which we continue to build, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we are meeting today. We are on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, Whadjuk Noongar country, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Peoples joining us here today. So Nangkwalk Asha, so my name is Asha and I'm the Translation and Impact Manager here at UWA for ICRA, which is the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research. It's a joint UWA and Curtin centre which is funded by the state government, and I'm also the Deputy Chair of our Development and Equity and Inclusion Committee as well here on the UWA side. So it's wonderful that we have our Senior Women Plus in Astronomy Fellowship, which is one of our main programs that we're doing, we're instigated many years ago, and I do have Dr. Renu Sharma here as well, who I think was one of the leads in bringing such a culturally and linguistically diverse group together, as well as all the progress that we've made for gender equity as well. So certainly want to acknowledge the hard work that has been done. And you know, through that program, we're able to bring extraordinary women such as Professor Prajval Shastri, that we will hear from tonight, to spend several months with us, so sharing knowledge, fostering connections and collaboration across both nodes of ICRA, but also bringing those global connections and opportunities as well. So it's wonderful that we're able to partner with the Institute of Advanced Studies to deliver this public lecture. Are we listening to the urgent call of humanity as scientists and as citizens? So Professor Prajval Shastri is a renowned Indian astrophysicist specialising in the study of giant black holes in distant galaxies. She believes that the cultivation of scientific thinking is for everyone and uses astrophysics as a vehicle towards that goal. She's also deeply concerned about barriers to equity in the sciences and is the Vice Chair of the Women in Physics Working Group of the International Union of Pure and Applied Physics, the founder and past chair of the Gender in Physics Working Group of the Indian Physics Association, and Vice Chair of the Executive Council of the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development. So a very warm welcome and looking forward to Are We Listening to the Urgent Call of Humanity?
Thank you very much to all of you for coming here, and a special thanks to the Institute of Advanced Studies and to ICRA for organizing this lecture. It's a real privilege and honor for me to speak to this audience. So I'm a physicist and I investigate distant black holes. I'm not a climate scientist, nor a sustainability scientist. So you may wonder what qualifies me to speak on this topic today. Primarily, it has to do with the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development, which the United Nations proclaimed last year, and it ends this year. And it turned out that it was the Global Union of Physicists who actually took the initiative to have this year declared, and one thing led to another, and that's how I got involved in the International Year activities. So what impelled, you may ask, the leadership of the Global Union of Physicists to take this initiative? Perhaps fundamentally it was this notion that curiosity-driven science, purely curiosity-driven science, has much to offer to humanity for a better world, particularly in the context of the current catastrophe that confronts humanity. But it became an opportunity for us to reflect upon the scientific method and its role in our daily lives, and also on the practice of physics in the current context. So that's about the international year and how I got involved in debating about topics such as this. I would like us to reflect upon this image. It was the first ever photograph of the Earth taken from the outside. I don't know how many of you remember it. I was about 10 years old at the time. And it was taken by the Apollo 8 astronauts. It had an amazing impact on humanity at the time. It brought home not only the ethereal beauty of our planet, but also its fragility, as it seemed. So, what does modern day astrophysics tell us about it? Astrophysics, which undilutedly curiosity driven and so forth. What does that tell us about the current context? So lessons from studying our neighboring worlds are that the conditions and the temperatures and the landscapes are very hostile, so they are not alternative homes. We know now that over 4,000 stars in the Milky Way have planets around them. Over 5,500 such planets are known. Some of them are called habitable by the scientific community. I personally think that's a misnomer, because all it says is that the temperature on the surface of such planets is such that water can exist in liquid form. It doesn't mean that we can pack our bags tomorrow and go there. These planets are several tens of thousands of light years away. And that is what also Michel Mayor, who is a physicist who studies these things and got the Nobel Prize for it, said, and that is also what the collective astronomers for planet Earth has reaffirmed. So the Earth is indeed this little blue dot, as Carl Sagan called it, floating in the vast expanse of space, very fragile. And there is no planet B. That is our only home. So what does science, what does curiosity-driven science have to offer in the context that we face today? Most of all, perhaps, it is the scientific method, which is not only about being curiosity-driven and seeking the truth, which is not unique to science, but about the willingness to confront evidence and change previous conclusions. So the scientific method is therefore self-correcting, and that is therefore the best method we have to understand the world around us. And the scientific method and science is clear. It is clear, there's no confusion about what is the assessment of our current condition. Carbon dioxide emissions have constantly increased since the Industrial Revolution, which has resulted in temperatures, the average temperatures increasing alongside. And of course, it's not only about global warming, but also about other catastrophic consequences worldwide. In fact, one of the leaders of NASA had this to say: the thing to remember is that it's clear that the best time to have reduced emissions was 25 years ago, but the second best time is to reduce it right now. In fact, it was a long time ago that leaders of the world came together in Stockholm and came up with this thing called Our Common Future, where sustainable development was stated to be an imperative. And it was very clearly seen as to what would be the future if that was not followed. But why did it not happen? Why was there no course correction? The fact is that applied science or modern technology has always been a double-edged sword. It has brought us amazing achievements such as therapies that save lives, communication, and all kinds of other technologies, but and also technologies that have saved drudgery and created leisure. But on the other hand, it has also brought us carcinogenic pollutants, microplastics in cosmetics that impact ocean life, and the atomic bomb, and now global warming. So it is clear that we have to take recourse to the social sciences that look at human behavior and ask what causes us to harness such technologies in ways that can be catastrophic. It is also clear that we have to question our frameworks themselves, or the lack thereof, and the loss of our capacity to think of our habitat as the commons, to think of ourselves as stewards of that land and space that we inhabit. And indeed, First Nation peoples all over the world are those that have upheld those values and the kind of understanding that we need in order to understand our place in the universe and the connections we have with each other and with our habitat. So, in fact, going forward from the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development, there was an initiative, successful one, which declared the next decade as the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development, but now sciences include all sciences and all knowledge. So then, what does this broader understanding and perspective tell us? What do we learn? Taking recourse to this letter from a bunch of scientists and scholars that was sent out on the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference to the citizens of the Earth. Clearly, the arguments they make clearly tell us that we are not good neighbors and good ancestors. So they make it clear that we humans are ultimately responsible for the current crisis, but it is a minority that are responsible for the majority of the damage, while those least responsible are going to be facing the impacts. So for example, you have the small island states, which are going to be really heavily impacted by climate change and global warming. They are going to lose everything, their livelihoods, their homes, and their connection with the land if temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius. We also have other sources, not necessarily related to climate change, or indirectly related to climate change. For example, this vast tract of land, which was a village inhabited by first peoples in India, which was cleared for a coal mine, but not to provide power to them, but instead to provide power to people like me sitting in Bengaluru. Again, those least responsible are hardest hit by the impacts. This is an example of cobalt mining in the Republic of Congo, which is necessary for all our gadgets and devices, but the supply chain is quite horrific. And then, of course, there's the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a map of the per capita global greenhouse gas emissions from 2009. And this is the plot in 2016. This is a similar plot where it's the country contributions are clear. Unfortunately, Australia is at the top in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions per capita. And this is the more contemporary plot, which I have made a little bit more clear here. And you can see, of course, the amount that needs to be reduced, because things need to go down from there to like there. So this is India, and India is just pushing the boundaries of what might be overshooting. But one important point here is that this is for all of India. It does not talk about the minority within India who are also very heavy emitters. And so effectively, the top 10% or whatever it is, we don't even know the numbers, which would include people like me, salaried scientists like me, would be hiding behind this very low average that is all across the country. So what are the root causes of the crisis? Again, appealing to that letter that I mentioned from scholars and scientists to citizens of the world, it is individualistic, materialistic, exploitative, short-term thinking that has led us to lose sight of the public good. Consumerism and self-indulgence are glorified, while they result in ill health, in injustice, and in apathy. And a focus on economic growth distracts from actually achieving well-being and happiness. So an important point here is that tech fixes cannot address the problem. Tech fixes are, of course, necessary. They are necessary for all over the planet, but they're particularly necessary for those who are currently dispossessed and do not have even a minimum level of well-being to achieve that well-being. But they're far, far from being sufficient to address the current problem. That's clear from that graph that I showed earlier, because the amount of reduction that is necessary is from here to here, which cannot be achieved just by tech fixes. Secondly, the richest 20% across the planet consume about 80% of the world's resources. And the top 10% emit as much carbon dioxide as the bottom 5%, 50% do. So I'd also like to quote this thing from somebody called Kentaro Toyama, who is an information technology professor in the University of Michigan, who says technology, on average, amplifies the outcomes of the underlying socioeconomic structure. So you can't just unleash technology and expect it to solve a problem. Furthermore, a much more recent study finds that wealthy nations are responsible for 74% of the global ecological damage. And this is obviously a country-wise study, but the same would be true if you went into a country and looked at its population distribution. And the more inequitous a country is, the more this is going to be true for the richest of that country. The whole carbon credit towards net zero effort is again something that is unethical, because it's effectively saying, I want to keep my lifestyle, preserve my lifestyle, but I will go to a village and pay them to plant trees so that by them planting trees, I can preserve my lifestyle. So that's unethical because they need to be planting trees in order to increase their well-being. But it's also quite unfeasible and impractical. I mean, there are all the questions about who is going to plant the trees, who is going to nurture them, what will actually happen, who is going to do the monitoring, etc. So that is why there is this report by Collective in Africa and Future Earth jointly calls it how big polluters are advancing a net zero climate agenda to delay, deceive, and deny. So where do we want to be? What would a good life for all look like? That is, what are our values? We all, of course, need material well-being, but that material well-being has to be sustainable and resilient. We also need spiritual well-being, which might include, for example, concern for other life forms. We need equity and justice, because that is a very, very central value. But we also need democratic governance overarching all of this. So there is that pentagon in the middle, which is where we want to be. Another way of looking at where we want to be is the so-called donut economics by Kate Raworth, where this donut, the inner ring of the donut signifies the limits of a good social life, the minimum limits, so nobody should be within the ring. That is indicated by that. And the outer ring indicates the physical limits of the planet. So the donut economics idea says that we all need to be in the middle. But if you look at their analysis, of course they talk about the root cause also, as being this idea of a human being, which we are actually not, but looking at too many of such images, we think that's what we are. But we really need to get here to an image which recognizes that it's a we, not a me, and which recognizes that our brains are wired for empathy, cooperation, and mutual aid. So the analysis that this framework has given for different countries are shown here. This is for the whole world, an average. So you can see that there is a lot of population of the inner ring, which should not be. So the red segments should not be. They should be pushed into the donut. And this is the planetary boundary. So all of this is overshooting those planetary boundaries. So here is nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon dioxide emissions. This is the ecological footprint. This is the ecological footprint, and that is the material footprint. So here are plots for different countries. So you can see that countries like India are just about crossing the planetary boundary on the one hand, but are populating the inner part of the circle on the other, which means that there is a large section of the population that does not have minimum societal needs met. And of course, these countries are heavily overshooting the planetary boundaries. So is the good life feasible for all? Mahatma Gandhi said a very long time ago that the earth is sufficient for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So that would imply that all we need to do is get rid of the socially unnecessary stuff, that is, get rid of the greed. An example is this image of Earth by night, which shows the impact of artificial lighting. So we have artificial lighting to light our spaces at night, our work, for our comfort and for our leisure. But as you can see from this picture, a big fraction of that light is going upwards, where it is wasteful and unnecessary. So all we need to do to reduce that energy is to reduce and make this a dark picture, right? So there's actually several research investigations which have looked at this question. For example, this one, which has used a simple bottom-up model and assumed a decent material living for all on the planet. And they have found that even with population increase by 2050, it is still possible with current resources, with 1960 energy levels, to provide a decent living for all. So this is what they say. Global final energy consumption in 2050 could be reduced to the levels of 1960, despite a population 3 times larger. So then it is possible. So what does that mean? Especially, what does it mean for people like us, who are people of privilege, and privilege comes with responsibility? Obviously, we can't be oblivious to the evidence. The environmental emergency is everyone's work to address. We cannot assume that someone else will deal with it, whether it's government or policymakers or sustainability officers. Business as usual is not an option. Government's inaction and fossil fuel companies' actions cannot be excuses for our inaction. And we must also be mindful that we are complicit through our consumption, both directly and indirectly. So what do we do to get there, to get where we want to be? So here, I'm not the competent person to come up with gems of suggestions, but many, many people have shown the way. There's, of course, the very straightforward and obvious thing of individual choices. So individual choices to cycle or bike, take public transport, to eat only seasonal and local foods, turn off the lights, and all that sort of thing. There is also a need to rethink what is the meaning of the good life. So, does it always have to be predicated upon material goods? So, for example, is a vacation overseas every year a prerequisite to the good life? Is celebrations with a ton of gifts, material gifts, a prerequisite to the good life? A friend of mine back in India said that they have resolved that they will give presents to people that only involve food. So interesting grains or fruits and that sort of thing. Another friend many years ago pointed out something to us, and so then we had this dictum at our children's birthday party that presents were not necessary, but if they insisted on presents, then they had to be either a card that they made or something else that they made or picked up from nature. But these are all individual things. They are necessary, but they are just a baby step. So maybe we should be thinking, how do we think about the next sphere of influence, our workplaces, our institutions, our neighborhoods? Maybe we should be thinking about a cap on salary ratios, or equalizing perks across the workforce. Maybe we should be thinking about calculating unsustainability footprints of our workplace. So in that context, I'm familiar with at least two examples. One from the collective called Astronomers for Planet Earth, who are looking at the unsustainability footprint of astrophysics research. Another example, more recent one and more comprehensive, is by another physicist group who call themselves High Energy Astroparticle Physics and Cosmology Plus, who have come up with a very comprehensive report looking at the unsustainability footprint of all the different sectors of our research, whether it is computing, infrastructure, even food. So all of the above are indeed necessary, and they can seed culture change, but they're far from sufficient, because the task ahead, the reduction that is necessary, is huge. So what is really needed is institutional and structural change. So what do we do about that? For example, we know that there are examples of students across the United States and Canada who have got their universities to divest in fossil fuel companies. Such collective action to demand for responsible actions from institutions, both public and private, is a very, very important way forward. Mainstreaming sensitization to sustainability and equity in all workplaces, businesses, and in all curricula, perhaps, is what we should do. And perhaps educational institutions need to shift from aspiring to be profit-making to aspiring to educate and grow critical thinkers, so that they are prepared for the collective action that becomes necessary to go forward. We, of course, have to reject the competitive paradigm in academia, perhaps, and instead build a fostering collaborative paradigm of knowledge creation with knowledge that belongs to all. Perhaps we need to apply donut economics to city governments, businesses, and academic institutions. Perhaps we also need to look at technology very critically and accept only technologies which are designed a priori to be equitable, inclusive, and sustainable, which perforce means that the process has to be democratic and therefore the technology open source. And maybe all of this is not so radical, but only involves connecting the dots. And for example, we are all now concerned in a mainstream sort of way with the lack of equity, diversity, and inclusion in our workspaces, in businesses, in academia. We are also concerned about mental well-being of the participants. So then, isn't a collaborative environment the undercurrent of all these concerns? So then, these are just possibilities that many people have pointed out. It was actually quite interesting for me that when I was preparing for this talk, I came across this paper. I'm sorry. I came across this paper by two scientists called Ulay and Kelly, who had looked at exactly this and who had expressed frustration that as practicing scientists, we are unable to do the action that we are impelled to do in order to address the problems. And So they suggest a parallel to the donut economics model and a rethink of academia along similar lines of collaborative environments and open source, open science frameworks. So I want to end this by leaving us with a few questions in an attempt to respond to the scientists' and scholars' call to be better ancestors and good neighbors. So can we look at the evidence with a willingness to change our conclusions? Can we be mindful that we are complicit in this ecological overshoot? Can we address the root cause, which is the I, me, mine paradigm? That. Can we scrutinize every intervention with the values lens? That one. Can we build community at every level, which acknowledges our connections with each other and also our connections with our habitat? And can we have the big picture, namely the well-being of all, as our framework? So this, for me, summarizes it. There is no planet B. Tech fixes will not work. And the earth is sufficient for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. So I want to leave you with this quote from Howard Zinn. It's a long quote, but effectively he said, "The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory." So I'll stop there, and I'd like to take questions.
My goodness, I'm not sure. I think I still need a moment to digest so much thought-provoking insights and concepts around it all, and I think that certainly that personal responsibility, and as a parent as well, I'm always mindful of what I'm role modelling for my son and my family. But I'll. Do I take this out, Audrey? Is this one working? No. Just mindful of people. Is that coming through? No. One of the initiatives through our Development and Inclusion Committee was we actually had a talk from a range of people with hidden disabilities in the workplace the other day, and we have someone who's almost deaf, someone who's almost blind, and also an autistic researcher, and hearing their different perspectives. So I'm very mindful to make sure that people can hear, because the gentleman who is hard of hearing did highlight that if you can't see your lips, and that people go, "Oh, I've got a loud enough voice," that it doesn't help because it doesn't amplify and pick up in the hearing aids. If not, I will make sure that I repeat the question. So I think it's giving everyone a moment to think about their questions.
Testing. Test.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Let's start with Lucy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was absolutely brilliant and fantastic to see your insights. I'm an educator and I work with a lot of schools, and I was interested to hear what you were talking about with changing up curricula and how you think, I wondered if you had any insights in how you think we could shape curricula to be able to drive some of this institutional sort of larger scale change that you think we need to take to enact for a better world.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I don't think this is, I'm not the first person to say this, but what we have in mind is that right now, you know, in universities and colleges, there'll be a course on sustainability or a master's in environmental studies or something like that, and they will study things related to this, and they may study sustainability and equity, not necessarily, but they may. So I was, what I was implying was that instead of being ghettoized like that, it should be mainstreamed. So all people of all disciplines should learn to grapple with these problems. So it should be much more mainstreamed in that way. So we do have, now that, you know, concerns for equity, inclusion, and diversity have become mainstreamed, it is quite common to have sensitization workshops and, you know, that sort of thing. It's still not got into the curriculum, I think. I don't know if people have like a course on values or a course on ethics, which includes, I don't know, maybe some of the younger people may say, which includes looking at, for example, why there are inequities that we see today, what are the historical processes, something like that. I don't know if that is mainstreamed, but something like that, that it should not be restricted to the so-called discipline or sub-discipline, but it should be wider.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your talk. You said towards the end there that the tech fix won't work, and I agree with you, but there is a sense in which, or there is the potential for a situation in which the situation becomes so dire that somebody tries something either around the edges, sort of as they're sort of de-extincting certain animals now, and they're using nanotechnology to break down pollution, etc., but they could use, you know, they could try solar radiation management or some big geoengineering technology to try and take a shortcut to solving the problem. I'm very much like the ethos of where you're coming from, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, the potential for a big intervention of that kind. Thank you.
So I presume you're talking about like these geoengineering techniques which will avert global warming and so on. I would be heavily suspicious and skeptical because one of the things that I think we have jettisoned as scientists is this idea of the principle of abundant caution. It should be part of our protocol, but it is less and less so, whether it's in medical science or agriculture or in any of these things. And I would be inclined to apply that. And I don't think they have a visible solution. And yeah, so one thing I did not say about technological fixes is they could fix the problem, but for a minority. So for example, with global warming, one could get air conditioners. But then the thing is, who will get the air conditioners? How many people will get the air conditioners? So it will not be something that increases the well-being of all or assures the well-being of all.
How do humans need to use astrobiology and astrophysics to
Sorry,
stop
you have to
climate
speak
change?
a little louder. I'm also a little hard of hearing.
Say it again, but loud.
How can humans use astrobiology and astrophysics to save the planet?
I don't know about astrobiology because I have very little expertise in that. But astrophysics, I would say it just tells us how small and how insignificant we are, and so therefore how precious this earth is, and therefore how hard we have to work to preserve and save our habitat. So I don't think it can directly help in any kind of, actual measures per se.
Thank you. Change is normally brought about by the general public and possibly initiated by groups such as scientists. How would something radically different like circular economics be brought in? Because that's what the world needs at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm not an economist, so I'm not quite the right person to answer that. It's like outside my competence. But I assume you mean an economics where that is more regenerative rather than degenerative, where we do not sort of produce a lot of waste and chuck it away, because there is no away. Is that what you mean?
Everything doesn't have to grow every year. Productivity doesn't have to increase all the time. Possibly if one factory goes out, another can come in, otherwise there's no change. So it's minimum change on the economic front. And all of these massive profits made by banks and others could be a thing of the past.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
again, I'm not an economist, but one thing that is clear to me is this so-called adherence to the idea of GDP and GDP growth as sort of a measure of something positive. That are very, it first of all instinctively doesn't make much sense to me because it doesn't address well-being of people. And it certainly doesn't address issues of equity or inclusion or decolonization or any of those things. And so what I'm not very familiar with circular economics, but I've looked a little bit at this idea of donut economics, especially because the proponents talk about it not just being an economic theory, but it being applicable to various kinds of institutions, both small and big. And so they talk about how the idea of growth, as you put it, is flawed, clearly. Growth, they talk about, what was very compelling was they talk about growth like humans grow. So we grow up to some point, but then we mature, and then we stay mature. We don't then grow further. So yes, I mean, these sort of unseemly insane profits that corporates make, they certainly do not increase the well-being of people.
We can wrap it up, and so I just want to ask everyone to say another huge thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.